This is Join Us in France, episode 455, 455. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France. Everyday life in France, great places to visit in France, French culture, history, gastronomy, and news related to travel to France. Today, I bring you a conversation with my friend Elise Riven of Toulouse Guided Walks about the best bookstores in France and the places bookworms would love in France. We'll also do an episode about libraries at a different time. This one is on bookstores, and you may remember that episode 371 of this podcast was about the famous bookstore in Paris, Shakespeare and Company. I think that's the one all English-speaking people talk about. But there are many more, as you'll hear today, even some that sell books in English. This podcast is supported by donors and listeners who buy my tours and services, including my itinerary consult service and my GPS self-guided tours of Paris on the Voice Map app. And you can browse all of that at my boutique, joinusinfrance.com/boutique. And if you don't know about my tours and you want to read the details, read the reviews, go to joinusinfrance.com/Annie Tours, and it'll redirect you. For the magazine part of the podcast, after my chat with Elise, since it's August and this is a slow news month, I'll talk a little bit of this and a little bit of that, including a little bit about the Olympics coming up and also how to pay for medical services in France should you need any. This has come up again, and so I wanted to mention it. Bonjour, Elise.
Bonjour, Annie.
We are going to talk about something that I'm titling France for Bookworms.
Yes, France for Bookworms.
Yes, we're going to talk about a lot of different places in France where people who love books would be very, very happy.
France is, and it always amazes me, as long as I've lived here, France is a country that has an enormous number of bookstores. And it is a fact that in France, bookstores are opening all the time, not closing, which is really remarkable. That is, there are obviously some bookstores that close, but considering what is happening in general in the world with online buying and Kindle and all of that, it is remarkable to know that in France, there are bookstores that open all the time, and bookstores stay in business in France. And I like books a lot. So, as you know, my house is about to sink under the earth because it has got so many books in it. So this is really kind of a fun thing to talk about.
Yes. So I had a lot of books. Growing up, I collected books. This was one of the few things that my parents, who were very blue collar and did not spend a lot of money on anything, they would buy me a book. If I asked for a book, they would buy me the book. So it was always a treat. I was a bookworm in terms of going to the lending library and things like that. But it's true that since moving back from the US, I have stopped buying paper books so much because I don't know where to put them anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I do understand. And of course, I do read a lot of my mystery stories and things on my Kindle because I figure, well, those I can read and then just sort of erase them. Whoop, it's a kind of a magic of electronics. But I still have this deep, deep, deep affection for books. And I have to say that it never ceases to astound me that in France, one of the things that people give to each other at Christmas time is books. And bookstores, like chocolate shops, do the best business that they have around Christmas time.
That's probably true in America as well, don't you think?
I would really strongly doubt it. And of course, the other thing is, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about today, is that we're not going to talk about the chain stores that, of course, have other things as well. This is independent, privately owned bookstores.
Right. We have a lot of them. And there are definitely places in Paris and in the rest of France where when you visit, you should probably pop in if you like books. And now, a lot of these books might be in French, but we are also going to talk about a few bookstores that have books in English.
Absolutely. And if ever you know of or have heard of a writer, a lot of bookstores, not every single bookstore, obviously, but a lot of bookstores in Paris and elsewhere do have conferences about writers. They have writers who are invited and usually talk a little about their book, and then you can get a dedication. Listen, I have to tell you this. This is here in Toulouse, and I'll mention the bookstore a little bit later because it is on the list of the best bookstores in France anyway. Colson White, who has won the Pulitzer Prize twice in the United States as a writer, which is a rare event. He came here to Toulouse, and I have a book signed by him. So you see, it's not just French writers. Oh, I'm getting all excited here.
So did you get to chit-chat with him a little bit?
No, actually, the truth is, it was my friend Gina. I couldn't go. I think I had some reason why.
Oh, Gina got the book for you.
She got the book for me. She was lovely. I didn't ask her to, and she did it at the end, and she had him sign it for me. So I have it addressed to me, even though he's never seen my face.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so you put together a list. I put together a different list. Let's see how we do, Elise.
Okay.
I'll let you take it away.
Okay, so actually what's considered to be the largest bookstore complex, that's the term that's used actually in France, is a bookstore that began as a specialty store for scholastic books, and that is Joseph Gibert, which is in the Latin Quarter. It was begun in the 1880s by a professor who decided that it was important to have a bookstore not just for literary things and very obscure intellectual things at the time, but to have a bookstore that offered scholarly books and scholastic books and make it available with a big selection for a general public. And so it was his baby, and it was started on Boulevard Saint-Michel, which is still where the headquarters are. And later on, he left the bookstore to his two sons, who opened up branches. So actually, even though, and you and I both know this from spending a lot of time in that area, there are several Joseph Gibert right on Boulevard Saint-Michel. Some of them are owned by one brother, and some of them are owned by the other. And don't even ask me how I know which one is which. I have no idea. They also have branches in some other cities. There's a small branch here in Toulouse as well. They specialize in everything. That is, there's no such thing. They have scholastic books, they have new books, they have used books, they have literary books, they have intellectual books, they have children's books. It is the biggest bookstore in France.
Right. It's one that most people will recognize the name. I mean, they're big, and I'm sure they're more than just Paris. I mean, there's one in Toulouse. There's probably ones in different towns as well.
I would think so. I do know that the one here in Toulouse specializes specifically in scholastic books, and I think it has a used book section, which is something a lot of these bookstores do have. And of course, now it's become more fashionable to do that again anyway, is to recycle books by giving them a second chance, in a bookstore. Right? That is not the most famous bookstore for tourists, but it is for most French people to be known as the big bookstore for general interests of every kind. I think it's got 3 or 4 floors, the main store on Boulevard Saint-Michel. It's a big deal. Everybody who's ever been to Paris knows about it.
Right. And besides, if you go to high school in France, this is one of the few places where they ask you to buy books. That's where you get your used books, school books, And it's very interesting because later on at the university, they don't typically ask you to buy a lot of books. They will, my daughter anyway, she did her whole schooling here. She did all the way to a master's degree. And I think she had a couple of professors suggest some books, but it's not like me when I went to the US to college, where I had to spend thousands on books, literally. It's not like that in France.
No, that's interesting. In the States, it's quite the opposite. In high school, you don't usually have to buy your books, but in college, yes, you do.
Yeah, it's the opposite.
And then, of course, the other bookstore in Paris that is extremely famous specifically for English-speaking people is Shakespeare and Company.
Right. And we did an episode about the history of Shakespeare and Company. Can't remember what number it was, but it was a few months back.
It was a while back. And of course, Shakespeare and Company is probably one of the largest English language bookstores in France. And it has a very long history. Interestingly enough, I was just doing some other research this morning about it because the original bookstore was not where it is right now. Right now, it is on basically a Quai de la Seine, which is, by the way, where they used to burn people in the Middle Ages.
How charming.
How charming, right? Well, hey, you got a good point of view if you're standing in the Esplanade of Notre Dame. But the original bookstore was created by, of course, Sylvia Beach, and it was in the same area.
It was perhaps 10-minute walk from there.
That one closed actually during World War II, And the one that exists now was reopened in 1951, where it is now. And of course, it was very famous even in the 30s, 40s, and 50s because it published books. And that's something else that's very interesting here, is that I don't know if any of the independent bookstores in the United States do that, but there's a history in France of certain bookstores also being publishers for certain books. And there's one in Toulouse called Privat. And what Shakespeare and Company did, of course, was publish books that were banned. It was very scandalous. And all of the people in the 20s and 30s and 40s, like Hemingway and all of those people, of course, made it famous. They put it on the map, so to speak. They still have readings. I was looking at the list of the people that have actually been invited to do readings there. And it's very much current, contemporary writers, French and other as well.
Yeah, it's huge. So just a tip for those of you who want to visit Shakespeare and Company when you go. There's always a line, unless you go in January and February. This is a place that gets a lot of people want to see it. And it's right by Notre Dame, so it's easy to get to. They do have security if you want to go inside of the store. And so you should plan on at least half an hour before you can get in. And it's best if you get there before they open at 10 in the morning, because after that, it's just permanently full of people.
Yeah, the word I actually put in the little show notes was besieged. That is what it is. It's besieged.
That's a good word, yes. This time of year, we're recording this in late June. I'm sure there's 100 people standing outside right now.
I mean, and of course, sometimes I think people just come to take a picture of a selfie with the sign in the back.
Which is fine as well, you know. Well, of course they do that. I do that. Don't you do that?
Of course I do that.
Of course. Okay. So we're clear.
Everybody does that, right? So other than that, I thought it would be fun to talk about some bookstores that have what we could call specialties in a sense, you know, that have specific interests or are in places that are particularly interesting to visit. And one of them, I know I've been there, but I don't have that clear memory of it because it kind of blends with a day that I spent going in and out of some of the galleries. There is a bookstore that is very, very old, again from the end of the 1800s, called the Librairie Joussaume, which is in the Cours Vivienne.
Aha, okay.
And the Cours Vivienne is one of the most beautiful of those covered galleries.
Right, it's right by the BNF too.
It's right by the BNF. It's in the 2nd arrondissement.
Okay, perhaps we should explain what the BNF is.
BNF stands for Bibliothèque Nationale Française, which means the huge French National Library.
Right. So this is a library, not a bookstore. And we will do another episode about the beautiful libraries in France. But yeah, so Galerie Vivienne is right across the entrance for the main BNF Richelieu, which reopened recently and is totally worth a visit. But right across from it, there's the entrance to one of these covered passages, Vivienne, Galerie Vivienne, and it has a marvelous bookstore inside.
Yes, and in fact, it's one of those places that's very old-fashioned, you know? I mean, it's very, very elegant inside. It's very, like, you imagine people are going to come out in dresses and clothes from the end of the 19th century.
Yeah, it's like Harry Potter kind of ambiance.
But the bookstore is actually a bookstore that specializes in old, used, and rare books. And I like it, but it's the kind of place where I'm always afraid to touch anything, you know.
You should be.
Oh, well, thank you so much. You know, I didn't have grease from my French fries left on my fingers, so it's
you never know.
It's very lovely. If you want to visit a place just to get a sense of that old world elegance, that's really, really what it is. Both the gallery and then this bookstore, which is very famous for being that kind of a place, you know, that people go to.
Yeah, and if you're looking for, you know, very expensive, very old, you know, first prints of certain books, I guess he can hook you up.
Yes, exactly. That's the kind of place where you go, you say, I'm looking for blah, 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 and they are specialized in things like that. It's very refined.
Extremely so, yes.
It's very beautiful. It's actually worth it. The combination of going to the gallery and the bookstore is really, it's kind of a neat thing to do. Yeah. It's right near the Palais Royal.
Yes, Galerie Vivienne. Yeah, so this is all in the area of the Louvre area, Palais Royal, Louvre, Palais Royal. There is so much to do in that area. You could probably spend a whole week and not see it all. It's just amazing. It's absolutely beautiful. And people should stop rushing through Paris.
You're absolutely right. And then talking about that area and elegant old bookstores, the other one, and this one I did not know about, but now I'm dying to go back and visit it. It's called Librairie de la Main. And it is right next to the Comédie Française. It is on the gallery of the Palais Royal. And it is considered to be the oldest independent bookstore in Paris, which probably also means in France because it was founded in the 1700s.
Wow.
It was founded before the French Revolution.
That is very old.
That's really old. Now, what I'm assuming is that at the time, a bookstore was for those people who could afford a book, which was probably not that many people. And so it was really something special. But it also is a place that specializes in rare books. And it is owned now by Gallimard. And Gallimard is one of the biggest publishing houses in France. A very prestigious one. Very prestigious one. And a lot of their writers win these prizes, all the time and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's basically why it's still around, why it hasn't closed, because I can't imagine that otherwise there would be enough people buying these kinds of rare books to keep a bookstore like that open. But Gallimard also puts their own books into the bookstore. So, of course, that makes it easier to keep it going. And it's in a gorgeous spot. If you've never been to the park of the Palais Royal.
Right. So it's on 155 Rue Saint-Honoré in the first arrondissement, which means that it's also surrounded by fashion houses.
Yes, it is.
So fashionistas and book lovers should go to La Librairie de la Main.
Now, talking about a bilingual bookstore. Now, a bilingual, it's interesting because we have 2 or 3 bookstores that specialize just in English language books. I'm sure there are other bookstores that specialize in other languages as well. But there's one called Galliani, which is on Rue de Rivoli, which is basically, it's right across pretty much from the part that's the Tuileries. So you can say Louvre Tuileries right there. And it's a bookstore that's half and half pretty much. It says online yesterday, it said 60% French and 40% English, but I've been in there and I don't know if you can really tell the difference. It's pretty much half and half, which is very interesting. And it's current books. So it has contemporary writers, both English-speaking writers and French writers, lots of people who can advise you on books. I like it a lot as a bookstore. It's medium size and it's very popular with tourists because the people who work there speak English and French. So you can get some advice from them.
Excellent. Yeah, that's really good. So if you forgot to pack your book for your trip, you can go get one there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Even if it's just a little mystery story, it doesn't make any difference. Now, let's get into the more serious kind of stuff like food. Food. Okay. So it turns out that the largest bookstore devoted to cooking and food in France I didn't make this up. It's what I read, so I'm writing it down. Okay. It's called La Librairie Gourmande.
Yum, yum, yum.
And it's in Montmartre. And it has everything, absolutely everything related to food of any kind in the world. France, cooking, cuisine, everything and anything you might ever want to have. And it's at 92 Rue Montmartre.
But that's not in Montmartre.
It says in the second. No, it's not in Montmartre. Excuse me. That's right. You're right.
Brain fart. Right. I can see why you would be confused.
Yeah, I was just writing it down. Yes, you're right. I've never been there. Have you been there?
It does not ring a bell.
But I would like to go now. So as far as I know, it's books. So it's not kitchen gadgets. It's not a place that sells cooking equipment, but it has every kind of cookbook imaginable and books about food. I have a book at home that's about the history of fruit. I like fruit, and things like that. I mean, you can have books like that are included in a bookstore about food and cooking. So it's kind of neat.
Sure, yeah.
As long as you don't have your appleworm and your bookworm meeting together at the same time, Then there's a bookstore dedicated to LGBTs, et cetera, in the Marais. It was started by, I think, a couple of people in the early 1980s. And it's called Les Mots à la Bouche.
Okay.
And it is really a bookstore that specializes in books and literature. That is, when they say books and literature, meaning not just literature, but also books that are nonfiction about anything connected to the gay community, the alternative community. And it is in the Marais, although it is in the 11th. It says the Rue de Saint-Ambroise in the 11th, but they consider it to be, I know why. I went online and I looked. The old address was in the Marais. And I went online to check again to make sure. And sure enough, it has moved to the 11th, which is not very far from the new Opera House.
Yeah, it's moved east a little bit.
But apparently it's a bookstore that is very popular with a particular population. It's a specialized bookstore, just like a cooking bookstore.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
Other specialized bookstores, L'Amour du Noir. That's in the Latin Quarter. And it is a secondhand bookstore, but it specializes very specifically in mysteries, thrillers, and science fiction. Annie, that's for you.
That's for me. Yep. I'll be happy there.
You'll be happy, very happy there. Rue du Cardinal Lemoine in the 5th in the Latin Quarter. And you have Artazart. Artazart, I don't know, it's a typical and arty kind of title for a bookstore, on Canal Saint-Martin, on Quai de Valmy, Canal Saint-Martin in the 10th. And it is apparently the place to go for any book about art, about design, about graphics, anything that's connected to any field of art in the world, including architecture. It is also open 363 days a year. The only day it is closed is the 1st of May. And that's good to know because there are not too many places that are open all the time.
That's true.
And then the last but not least is a place called L'écume des pages, which is a kind of play on words for L'écume des jours, which is an old book and movie from the 1930s. Jean Gabin, is that it? Jean Gabin, I think,
Well, I don't know who did the movie, but I know Boris Vian wrote it.
He wrote it.
I read it. I didn't watch the movie. See, story of my life.
Well, there you go. It's very good. It's a new bookstore that opened up just a few years ago on Boulevard Saint-Germain. And one of the things that it's a general bookstore, which means it has books of every kind for every kind of person, and including children's books. And apparently is doing very, very well. And one of the reasons why is because it's open every day until midnight.
Oh, wow. That's late.
Yeah. Which means that those of, us, you, and whoever, like you've done with your day of kind of touring, you've had your dinner and you just feel like taking a stroll. And instead of going, oh, everything's closed, well, there you are. You can just go. And one of the things that's, of course, always nice in bookstores is you can browse.
Right. So this is really close to the Saint-Germain-des-Prés church.
Right.
The Café de Flore. It's actually 2-3 businesses down from Café de Flore. So you'll probably, if you walk my Saint-Germain-des-Prés tour, you walk right in front of it. And I think I mentioned it in the tour as well.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things they were saying about it is that there were 2 bookstores that were famous. One of them that I know about called Hume, Hume, that closed because of the pandemic. That had been around for quite a long time. And so they said that the people who opened this were very brave or foolish, or whatever you want to, that they decided to try opening up a new bookstore in an area where 2 had just closed, and it's working. So
yeah, I think this bookstore has been there since before the pandemic.
It started, I think, before the pandemic, but it was not like famous, So, but it managed to stay alive, which is already something.
Very nice. Very nice. So there's a lot of bookstores in Paris that you can go look around and enjoy if you like that.
And as I was leaving the house, my husband said, and why aren't you going to talk about the bookstore that specializes in medical information? I went, really? Unless you're a doctor and you speak fluent French, I don't think that would be exactly what you would be looking for.
And of course, there are bookstores specializing in
just about everything, right?
A scholarly kind of thing. I'm sure they don't have books about, I don't know, drywall or something, but they probably have, not the whole bookstores anyway. They might have a book about drywall.
If there is one, my husband probably knows about it, anyway.
Yes,
but
yes.
So books about bricks, like how many bookstores do you know that just write about bricks? Well, they might be. You never know.
There's some books, yeah. Who knows?
But of course, there are other specialized bookstores. But hey, this is just a sampling.
Yeah.
Sampling. Now, outside of Paris, which of course still has more bookstores.
You know what, Elise?
What?
Most of France is outside of Paris.
Is it really?
Shocking, I know.
Oh my God, I don't think Parisians know that though.
Somebody has to let them know.
Oh, I think we should have T-shirts that say most of France is outside of Paris and walk around Paris wearing them and see what happens,
See what looks we get.
Really, that is not possible, madame, really. So starting with one that I know is extremely famous. I've been in it once, I have to admit, not more than that, because it was the long weekend that I spent in Bordeaux a few years ago. There is a very, very famous, an enormous bookstore in Bordeaux called Mollat, Mollat, and it is on the big pedestrian street, Rue Gambetta. I think it's called Rue Gambetta, but it's the huge pedestrian street.
Are you sure it's not Rue Sainte-Catherine?
I had it down as Gambetta. Do you have it down as Sainte-Catherine?
I do not. But the large pedestrian street is Sainte-Catherine in Bordeaux.
Okay. Maybe it's the cross street, but I don't count on me for the exact address at this point. Okay. It was started in 1888 by Mr. Mollat, and it is considered to be the most, I know there are lots of mosts in this list anyway, but it is the most ancient independent bookstore in France, older than even the ones in Paris, the original bookstore. That is the one that's still standing today. And it is over 2,500 meters of surface. It is huge, absolutely huge. Yeah. It is a bookstore that has everything, absolutely everything. And it is really famous. People who go to visit Bordeaux actually sometimes include visiting Mollat as a site to see.
Sure.
Just kind of like going to Shakespeare and Company in Paris, you know. I have to say, it was rather impressive, and I don't remember if I went through the entire bookstore or not, because that's huge, really. That's an enormous amount of space. But they must be doing something right. I know that they have a lot of readings. They invite a lot of writers there because it's so famous, and so I'm sure that lots of writers like going there because they get lots of people coming to sign their books, and, you know. Of course, yeah. But it's really very, very, very famous. Now, second on the list, and it's interesting because I know you and I have talked about this, and you don't really like this bookstore, and I'm not still sure exactly why, but Ombre Blanche here in Toulouse is on everybody's list as one of the nicest, most complete bookstores, serious bookstores in France. It has 3 stores actually now. It has the main store that is on 2 different levels, quite big, with an extensive collection of everything: art, literature, history, science, political science, philosophy. It has a second bookstore that is devoted to travel and nature books and cookbooks, which is very good too. And then it has a third bookstore, which opened, I guess, a few years ago, because I go to it fairly often, but I have no idea how long it's actually been there. And that is a bookstore devoted to foreign language books. So they will order any book for you that you want if they don't have it. And they do their readings. And that's where I got Colson White's signing book.
Yeah, they're very famous for that. I mean, they do events. Yeah, they do a lot of events.
It's very much a writer's bookstore in that sense, you know, that they like to go there because they will get crowds no matter what. Then everybody knows about that. They put a bulletin out every month with all of the readings and dedications and things like that, you know.
I can tell you I don't like it.
You said you didn't like it. You said you thought they weren't very friendly.
Exactly. I met the owner and I didn't think he was very friendly. I don't like the fact that there's nowhere to sit. They actually don't want you they don't want you handling the books. So it feels very strange to me. Being in the bookstore, you can't touch anything. Somebody will definitely come and bat at your fingers.
See, I've never had that experience. I've gone up to and spend hours in the art section. And there are a few seats. There aren't too many seats, but I've just spent hours.
Yeah, I just don't think it's a welcoming kind of bookstore. I think it's a bit stuffy, and it's also a mess because things are in different buildings. I don't know. I'm just not impressed.
Yeah, you don't like it?
No, I don't like it. No.
Okay, it's fine. I actually do. I mean, I go there for certain kinds of things.
You mentioned Privat before, which I called Privat. For some reason, I say the T, but I don't know why. I loved going to Privat when I was a kid.
Privat, we should explain, is it's a bookstore that exists, I think, since the beginning of the 1800s, that used to be a publisher. I don't know if it still is.
Don't know either.
And of course, and unfortunately, even since I've lived here, it has reduced its size. I mean, there were 2 venues, and now I think there's only one. It still is a bookstore, but I don't know if they do as they used to be very prestigious as a publisher as well.
What was the name of that massive bookstore right on Place du Capitole? We had a massive bookstore right there for decades growing up.
I don't know.
It wasn't Ombre Blanche. It wasn't Privat. It was some other one.
Right next to what used to be the cafe. There was a big cafe where there's now some other kinds of stores.
Yeah, I don't remember. But anyway, we have lost some massive bookstores. At the beginning, you said, it's still a place in France where bookstores are still a thing. But I do think we're slowly, it's losing grounds is happening slower than in other countries,
Right.
perhaps. But I think it's still happening.
Oh, I'm sure that is happening. It is. But as you say, it's certainly a lot slower. And then there's still a certain resistance because I know that I spend a lot of time in the city center here in Toulouse. And I'm always surprised that there's a new bookstore that opens. Now, I don't know how long it will last.
Exactly. That's the question. Yeah.
In Lille, which is a city that I have visited twice for a few days and is very charming, I have to say. They have a very big bookstore right on the big central square called Godon. And again, it's one of these very big 3 floors of books of every kind, every category for children, this and that. And they also do lots of invitations for writers to come and do signings. And it is the big bookstore in Lille.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In Marseille, there is a bookstore called Librairie Maupetit, and it was started by a family in the 1800s and now also belongs to Gallimard. It's interesting, Gallimard seems to be buying up a lot of bookstores. Maybe it's because that way they can put out all of their books, which they publish a lot, There used to be several different bookstores on the Canebière, which is the big, big avenue that goes down to the old port. There is only one at this point. In Lyon, there is a bookstore called Le Bal des Ardents, which is very lovely as a title. And it is their most famous independent bookstore. I have never been there. I'm not sure. But it says it specializes in hard to find and hard to get books. And they do lots and lots of readings and conferences and dedications as well.
I don't remember seeing that one. See? No.
And then in Strasbourg, which is a city that does not surprise me because it is a huge university city. It's the European community is there. It has lots of bookstores. And one of its most famous is a bookstore called Kléber.
Yeah, so I was in Strasbourg not very long ago, but I don't remember walking by that bookstore. Interesting. It might be on a street that most people don't walk to.
Yeah, I think it's, if I remember correctly, it's across from there are a couple of stores that are what we would call like small department store type things that are not quite, it's not on the place where the cathedral is, but not very far.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's where it is.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And then just to mention something that I discovered that is called Le Trouve-Tout du Livre, which is, I think, incredible because it's a tongue twister. And that's how do you make a name of a bookstore into a tongue twister? It is in a very small village called Sommeil, on the Canal du Midi in the Aude department, not far from Carcassonne. And it is considered to be the largest collection of old and used books in Europe.
Wow.
Over 50,000 books, old books, rare books, one-of-a-kind books. It's 1 level up and 2 levels down. And apparently people come from all over Europe to look for things there, which means that they probably have books in several different languages. They can't just be books in French. And it is famous. It's famous as a place for people who are bookworms to go and do what would be called to fouiller, how do you translate it in English?
Fouiller means to search through things. Yeah, searching through. Like imagine someone just rummaging around stuff to find something.
I saw 2 pictures of it on internet yesterday and I thought, wow, this is one of those places. If you don't like places that seem to be like underground grottos filled with books, don't go there.
Well, but the thing is, I like those types of places because then you look through, you rummage through stuff, and then you find the one thing, and then you just have to buy it because you found it. It's like you discovered a new continent or something.
Exactly. And the other thing to mention, and it's really not very far from this bookstore called I don't know why I'm having trouble with Le Trouve-Tout du Livre. I just thought, what a real tongue twister. Is the wonderful, wonderful village of Montolieu, which is very, very close by. Also in the Aude, which is it's about not quite even, I think, an hour from Toulouse. I've been through it 2 or 3 times and stopped there a couple of times. It's a small village that is dedicated to books and was started actually by some English-speaking people there. About half the people who live there are, in fact, English-speaking. And so everything and everybody, except for the people who run restaurants and maybe the pharmacy that works there, is connected to books. And they have bookstores that are for new books, for old books. They have book festivals.
Right, they're book fair, so you have special weekends where they put out a bunch of books outside. And there's places where you buy like per pound. Yeah, so it's going to be like you pick, like you're going to go get, people who like to read romance or your silly mysteries that you like. You can just go buy a few kilos of silly mysteries.
And then I'm giving to some bookworms to eat afterwards, It's really famous. It's called the Village of Books, basically, and it does have festivals. Now, maybe you know of a couple of dates about festivals. I'm not even sure.
I didn't look up some dates, but just go Google Montolieu and the festival and you'll find stuff. But there's a bunch of places like that. So, the big one, obviously, is the Paris Book Fair.
Right.
Which it's in March, I think, usually. And it's authors, publishers, and people like that. There's a Festival du Premier Roman in Chambéry. It's an event where people go and vote for their favorite debut novel.
Oh, it's cool.
Debut novel?
Debut. Is that French or English? Oh, boy.
It's both, and I don't know how to say it in either one. Okay.
Your favorite first novel?
Great author, first novel. There's one called Saint-Malo Étonnant Voyageur Festival. So this is for writers, filmmakers, and photographers from around the world to celebrate the spirit of adventure and discovery. Il y a le Quai du Polar in Lyon. So this is crime thrillers. That would be right up your alley. Definitely. That's in Lyon. They do this every year. There's a Festival de la Biographie in Nîmes. So if you like to read biographies, perfect for you. There's a Foire du Livre de Brive-la-Gaillarde.
That I do know about.
Okay, do tell us about that.
I should have remembered about that. It's actually Brive, which is not that far from here, isn't a kind of medium to smallish size city.
Yeah.
But it's famous for this book fair every year. And people come from all over the country and they have all of the publishers that present their books, their latest books. And so it's a big book festival.
Right. So this says 300 authors in general attend, and it attracts nearly 100,000 visitors each year. Mm-hmm. So it's a biggie. It's a really biggie. Brive-la-Gaillarde being a town of modest size, I would say.
Yes, very modest size.
It's really interesting. I have not been to that
I really haven't, but I would have liked to. I mean, each year when it's announced, I think I should go because it's not that far even by train to get. It's just north of here. I mean, it's not just north of here, but it's north of here.
Yeah. Then there's another event that you've probably attended, le Marathon des Mots in Toulouse.
Yes.
So this is an international literature festival that they feature readings, concerts, debates, exhibitions, things like that. So you've been there, right?
In fact, I would have liked to have gone this year, but for family reasons, because it was just this past week, I was not able to go. I love it. In fact, I'm actually thinking, why did I forget that it even existed? I love it. This is in June. It lasts for, I think, 5 days, pretty much. And it has what I've gone probably 7 or 8 years. I mean, I love it. Every year, they invite a group of authors with a particular, they usually have French authors, and then they take either a theme or a country and invite people from that country to come as authors. And they have readings. So it's the authors who read their books, but then you have famous actors and actresses who read excerpts from these books. And it's in about 20 venues different in Toulouse. And some of them are paying and some of them are free. It's really a big event. And I've actually gotten to see some of my favorite actors that way because they actually come because it's considered to be an honor to be invited to do some of these readings.
Of course, yes.
I've seen some writers from other countries, like there's a Cuban writer that I like a lot named Padura. I saw an interview with him, which was translated, of course, into French. But it's a big deal. It's wonderful.
Somehow I've managed to not go, which is weird, but I mean, I'm a bit of an introvert, really. When it comes to stuff like that, I'm happy with my books at home.
It's interesting because what they do is they program stuff starting at like 11 in the morning. I mean, it's really one of those kinds of festivals. So you have 4 or 5 events every single day, including a big deal one at 8 o'clock at night. So the ones that are the big deal ones, if you don't get the tickets ahead of time, forget it. So I have a tendency to know which places I can go to where I can just get there a little early and stand online and that's it. But it's wonderful. One year my sister was here. She does understand French. I took her. She was delighted, absolutely delighted. So it was kind of neat.
Very good, very good. There's the Festival International de la Bande Dessinée in Angoulême.
Yes, that's very famous.
So this is Comic Book Festival. It's the biggest one in Europe, apparently.
Yes.
Lots of comic books there. Le Livre en Poche de Saint-Maur. So this is dedicated to pocket-sized books. They have meetings with authors, workshops, and readings, which is, it's interesting because, I mean, the Livre de Poche are they have no monetary value. Like, you can't resell them for nothing. So it's kind of interesting that they have a whole festival around that.
Can I just interrupt you just for a second? Because I just read recently, in English, we say a paperback. We don't say livre de poche. In French, livre de poche means a book for your pocket.
Yeah.
And I discovered by accident, reading something recently, why it's called that. Because I don't remember which publisher wanted to see if they could get massive sales. And so they said, how about if we make books the size that you could fit into, like there's a standard size for pockets. I never really thought about it really being designed to put in a pocket. But that's what it was really for. Yeah.
And then there's the Festival du Roman Féminin in Paris. So it celebrates women's fiction. You know, there's workshops, signings. You can get to meet your favorite authors. That sounds like a very fun thing. Now, there's more Village du Livre than Montolieu, which we already mentioned. There's one called Cuisserie. C'est en Saône-et-Loire. I have never heard of this place. There's another place called Becherel in Brittany. It's known as the City of Books, and it's home to many secondhand bookstore. Fontenay-la-Joute in the Lorraine area. They have lots of bookshops, bookbinding workshops, and they host a major book fair every year. La Charité-sur-Loire, en Bourgogne-Franche-Comté. They call themselves the Book Town. They have workshops, an institute dedicated to the art of bookbinding and calligraphy. Essoy in the Aube. Wow, that's a place I've never been to. It's very small.
I don't even know where it is.
Yeah, kind of know where it is. That is like deep in the heart of France. Oh, it's famous for its association with the painter Renoir. So they probably have some sort of book and painter type thing.
Wow, okay.
Ambierle in the Loire, they also have a lot of bookstores and secondhand bookseller and an annual bookseller book festival. And of course, we will do another episode about the libraries because there are some glorious libraries you could visit in France. The most impressive one is BNF, Richelieu. So we'll probably name that. It'll probably be all about the BNF.
But of course, the whole history of libraries is fascinating in France anyway, and how they became public libraries.
Well, if you think about it, without libraries, we would all be a lot dumber.
That's right.
And we're quite dumb.
That's right. That is true.
So we needed these books. And it used to be that you could appreciate a person's intellect by the size of their library. Now, of course, that libraries fit in your pockets. There are people who read an awful lot of books that don't have any displayed in their homes.
No.
So it's changed a lot. And, you know, I have to mention this because I was my husband started listening to books. As soon as Audible was created, he started listening to books. So he's been buying Audible books for 20 years. And I was not into it. At first, I was like, no, I'm not going to understand it. It's not going to be good. And then I tried. The first one I tried, I felt like I didn't get anything out of the book. But the second one already was much, much better. So for people like you who listen to a podcast, I'm assuming you like listening to stuff. And if you do, I think if you haven't tried, any kind of audiobooks are so good because you can listen anytime. I don't know how much time you can reasonably spend in a week sitting down or lying down with a book.
Well, me personally, with maybe some exceptions, I would say 2 hours every night.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Yeah, I read. I cannot go to sleep without reading, period. I just cannot. This has been since I'm 6 years old. And when I say read, it could be on my Kindle, it could be in paper. It could, it does, but I'm reading, I'm not listening. Because when I read, I can't do anything else. If I try to do reading and something else, then I don't remember what I heard, read, whatever you want to call it. I just can't. So, there are days when I can't read that much because I'm just too busy or I'm just really too tired. I don't read a lot during the day, personally, because I usually am busy. I have to be sick, Yeah, it's like when it goes still back to being a kid when you're home from school because you're sick and then you get to stay in bed. And it's not even early in the evening. I mean, I do it late after I've done even watching my television. That's when I read.
Wow. Yeah. So I used to do that, but I haven't been able to do that for so long. Just work, family, things to do around the house. At the end of the day, I'm exhausted. I just fall asleep like a brick. I pick up a book, I'm asleep 5 seconds later. So I listen to books, and I listen to books when I'm walking, when I'm cleaning, when I'm cooking, when I'm, doing things, when I'm showering.
And you're able to concentrate on, do you remember what you listened to?
So every now and then I realize, I haven't been really listening for a bit. And so I back up and listen again, because your mind does wander. But you can get, there are so many books I would have never read if I couldn't have listened to them. I listen to a lot of classics that when I tell people I've listened to Moby Dick a few times, they're like,
you?
Really? Yeah, I love Moby Dick. It's a great book. I would have never sat down reading Moby Dick.
Well, that I agree. I can imagine,
It's too big. I read the entire Victor Hugo. Les Miserables, I read the whole thing. It's going to take me 2 months to listen to the whole thing because it's so long. But who cares? Like, I just do an hour or two a day and I get through those books. So it's just something that has been a big change. But I think for me, it has been a good change because I'm still in touch with literature through that way. And since I'm a bit of an introvert as well, and I don't love going to all these events and things, there's too many people. It suits my personality just fine, just putting the headphones on and listening to a book.
Well, it is true. I mean, I know when I do buy a book on Kindle, and I don't have the audio thing, but every time I do buy it, it pops up, you can get the audio version as well, So obviously it is, I agree with you. It's still being in touch with books and with writing. It is. It's just another way of dealing with them.
And I'm so into listening that even books that are not5published as an audiobook, I'll get them on Kindle, and then I'll get my phone to read me Kindle while I walk. So it sounds like a computer. I mean, it's a computer reader, but I don't mind. It's better than not reading the book. So I'm a weirdo. I'll admit it. I'm a weirdo, but you should know that by now, right? If you've been listening to this podcast long enough, I'm a weird country bumpkin. There you go.
The country bumpkin, you certainly are not. But I find it really interesting that now, for instance, I invest in paperback for books that I think are really good literature or important books that are not literature, like books for art history that have beautiful, that are important for me for other reasons. I went through a period of time where I made a collection of cookbooks that now, I look at them going, oh gosh, I really need to have the energy to go open one of those and do that recipe. But, I love looking at them.
Yes, cookbooks are great. Yes. So listeners, I would love to know, when I publish this episode on Facebook, I would love for you to comment on the post to tell us how you read, what you read, if you've been to any of these bookstores.
Yes.
What gets you interested? Are you interested in attending some of these book events that we've mentioned? I would love to know. Have you made the switch to listening to books? I would bet like half of the people listening to us listen to books as well. That would be my guess.
I don't know if I should wager with you about this one or not. I have to think about it.
Anyway, thank you so much, Elise. It's been delightful as always. Merci. Au revoir. Au revoir. Again, I want to thank my patrons for giving back and supporting the show. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing that. You can see them at patreon.com/join us. Thank you all for supporting the show. Some of you have been doing it for a long time. And even though I don't read all your names out every week, I do appreciate you very much. And a shout out this week to new patrons, Sonoma Gal and Yvonne Moreno. To join these wonderful patrons, visit patreon.com/join us to support, to sign up, and to support Elise, go to patreon.com/Elise Art. I am recording this on Thursday, and I'm scheduled to have my first Zoom meeting with patrons on Saturday. I'll schedule 4 Zoom meetings each month. They'll all be in the same week, just to keep things simple. Most of my patrons are in North America, so 3 of these meetings should work best for them and also for people in Europe, because I'm not getting up at 3 in the morning. I love you guys, but I'm not getting up at 3 in the morning to do a Zoom meeting. And the other thing that's important is that since I have no idea where you are, I can't tell you where this is going to be, but I'll tell you the time in France, and you should be able to figure it out for yourself. So there's going to be a Saturday meeting at 6 p.m. France time. There's going to be a 7 p.m. Sunday meeting, also France time. A Thursday 6 p.m. meeting, because I had people tell me, no, I can never do this on Sundays. I can never do this on Saturdays. I'm retired. I would like to do this on a weekday. All right, so there's going to be 3 times, Saturday 6 p.m., Sunday 7 p.m., and Thursday 6 p.m., and those will work for North America and Europe. There's also going to be a Sunday 9 a.m. France time, and that one will work well for Europe as well, if you get up early on a Sunday, but also for Hawaii, Australia, and New Zealand, okay? So everybody should be covered, and I really look forward to this. Now, patrons, you'll learn about this when you open your Patreon notifications or your Patreon app. It's going to be just one of the messages that you get from me, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. If you have questions you want me to address, just message me from inside of Patreon, please, because I get so many questions. You can't even guess the questions I get. Some of them, I'm like, have you heard of Google? Anyway, but if it comes from within Patreon, I'm not going to say, have you heard of Google? I will take care of you. Okay. So since this is a slow news week, let's talk a little bit about this and that. First, it's going to get very, very hot in France this late August. So far, most of France has not experienced the super high temperatures that we had last summer. In Paris, it was even a little bit rainy this summer, which is unusual. Well, Provence and Corsica were the exception. It got mightily hot there in July. But the rest of France was cooler than it had been last year. This weekend and next week, we'll go back to the 39 degrees and 40 degrees, which translates to 100 plus and way, way too hot. So a reminder to all of you, if you're booking accommodations for France in June, July, August, or even September, make sure there's AC, because you will die of heat if you happen to be here on a super hot day. Now, perhaps it's not going to be a super hot day, but you never know. And also, French people have this thing. To them, it's either I have AC or I have a pool. Well, when you are traveling, you're not going to be dipping in the pool every 5 minutes because you're hot, okay? So you need AC. You just need AC. So let's talk a little bit about how the sausage is made, the podcasting sausage, I mean. I'm always trying to improve the podcast, so I'm going ahead with things I'm not super comfortable with. First of all, Zoom meetings that I just told you about, and a whole bunch of new recording technologies. So I think I'd be a fool not to, go ahead and get on with the program because, of course it's comfortable to keep doing things the way you've always done them, but it would not do me or you a service. So going forward, my itinerary calls are going to be on Zoom. Now, you don't have to turn on the camera if you don't want to, but I'll turn mine on. And about those calls, I have to tell you how wonderful it is for me to do more bonjour calls than VIP service. I was working way, way, way too much when the only thing that you could book was the VIP service. Writing all those detailed itineraries was a ton of work. It was good work, but at times I felt like I was drowning and it got to be too much. So now with the bonjour service, it's cheaper for you, which is good, I guess. And also, once I hang up, I'm pretty much done. I do send people more information, but I send them things I've already written. And so I don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. And if I don't have it written already, you're going to have to do the Googling. But for the most part, I have a lot of stuff already written. So keep booking the bonjour service. I love it. I love talking to you. It's wonderful. In short Olympic news, you may have heard about the swimming events in the Seine. They had a triathlon in Paris today, and they swam in the Seine. They tested the water at 3 a.m. in the night and gave the go-ahead for today. Now, the Paris region is building more retention basins around the city because when it rains more than normal, excess water goes into the Seine, and that can increase pollutants and make the river unswimmable. By the Olympics, this should not happen again because there will be lots of basins retaining the water before anybody gets in there. And by the way, triathlon folks, they will swim anywhere. Unless somebody tells them there's crocodiles in there, they'll swim anywhere. They really are tough cookies. And no alligators in the Seine. No, we know that for sure. Let's talk briefly about incurring medical bills while in France. This has come up a couple of times recently, so it's worth explaining. So if you need to be taken to the emergency room, if you need to see a doctor, you may have to pay something. Now, if you see a doctor face-to-face, general practitioner, or even a specialist, it's normal in France to pay for that at the end of the visit. So the doctor will ask you for $25 or $50 or whatever the price is. Well, 55 more is for a specialist, and usually it's 25 for a general practitioner, which is incredibly cheap, okay? But if you go to the hospital and say they do a CAT scan, they do an ultrasound, they do whatever, X-rays, whatever they need to do, blood tests, well, you're not going to get a bill for that. And even if you want a bill for that, they might not be able to give you one because in France, if you're French, you have this magic green card called the carte vitale, and it has a chip on there, and that chip has your insurance info. And so you hand the hospital your card, they run the card, done. And you may have to pay a little bit extra, but you'll get the bill in the mail. And so when they're dealing with foreigners who don't have that card, some hospitals know exactly what to do. They'll just give you a bill that day. But some places, they won't do that. And so then they'll send you a letter that says, oh, we need your health insurance information. And you're like, well, but my insurance is not going to pay for this. Submit whatever health insurance information you have. It's not going to fit in the French system. So they'll say, oh, I give up, then pay the bill. And generally the bill, even if you had a CAT scan, even if you had an overnight stay in the hospital, you're not going to pay more than $1,000. I mean, if you needed emergency surgery, it will probably be more. But, you know, health care is inexpensive compared to the US by, like, it's probably 100 times cheaper, okay? So don't worry about it. But if possible, ask the hospital to provide you with a bill right away. But it goes completely against the grain for a French hospital to tell you, oh, you got to pay before you leave. They just don't want to do that. To them, that feels like a racket. Okay, you were ill. We will not put pressure on you to pay right now. This is just the mentality. And so insist a little bit to have that bill as soon as possible, or at least explain that your American health care system is not going to pay for this because it doesn't. It just doesn't. Or if it does, it's so little money. You know, if they charge you $150 for something, your American healthcare is going to say, what is this? Like, no, we don't have a code for this. We don't know. So just pay for it, okay? A little bit easier. And hopefully, you're not going to need any of this and you'll be fine. But one of the ladies who was at the boot camp, Catherine, so she was perfectly fine during the boot camp. And then she went to Paris and she felt sick in Paris and needed to go to an emergency room. So there you go. It happened. But she's fine. She's fine. My thanks to podcast editors Anne and Christian Codovan, who produced the transcripts. Remember to search the website. All sorts of good stuff there. Next week on the podcast, an episode about surviving France with Erin Trindle. It's funny because we had an episode about why life is awful in France, and now we do one about surviving France. You're going to think that we really hated there, which is not true. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2023 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons attribution, non-commercial, no derivatives license.